I was standing in the back of a kindergarten classroom, holding a tray of cupcakes I'd stayed up until midnight decorating, when my husband's ex-wife stood up in front of 22 5-year-olds and told them calmly smiling that I wasn't really family, just someone Daddy was dating. My stepdaughter Lily was sitting cross-legged on the carpet directly in front of her, in the little paper crown she'd made that morning specifically because it was Family Helper Day, and I watched her small face fall in real time, watched her look back at me with confusion, like she was trying to figure out whether what she just heard was something she should believe. I didn't say a word. Not yet. Because what Vanessa didn't know. Standing there in her perfectly pressed blazer, enjoying the small, cruel satisfaction of humiliating me in front of a room full of children, was that her own daughter's teacher had been quietly documenting violations of the custody agreement for almost 2 months. And that folder, sitting in a locked drawer not 15 feet away from where Vanessa was standing, was about to end her unsupervised time with Lily entirely. Before I tell you exactly what happened in that classroom, tell me, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? I love seeing how far this story travels, and I read every single comment. I also want to be upfront with you before we go any further. This story is a work of fiction, written for entertainment. The names, the people, the events. None of it is real, and any resemblance to anyone living is entirely coincidental. My name is Olivia Marsh. I'm 31 years old, and 3 years ago, I married a man named Eric. A quiet, devoted father, a structural engineer with calloused hands, and a habit of double-checking every single thing twice, including, I joked once, his own wedding vows. Eric had been divorced for almost 2 years when we met. His daughter, Lily, was 3 at the time. A small, watchful little girl with her father's same habit of studying a room carefully before deciding whether she trusted it. I didn't try to replace anyone. I want to say that clearly because it matters for everything that happened later. I never once asked Lily to call me Mom. I never inserted myself into decisions that weren't mine to make. I simply showed up consistently for 3 years. Bedtime stories, school pickups, scraped knees, the quiet, unglamorous architecture of actually being present in a child's life. Vanessa, Eric's ex-wife, never made it easy. Vanessa and Eric's divorce had been, by every account I'd ever heard, from Eric, from mutual friends, from the custody mediator herself, almost entirely Vanessa's doing. An affair discovered through a phone left unlocked on a kitchen counter, followed by months of denial, followed eventually by a confession that came only after Eric had already hired a lawyer. Eric had fought for, and won, primary physical custody of Lily. An outcome that is, statistically, genuinely rare in family court, and one that happened. According to the custody evaluator's report, specifically because of documented concerns about stability and consistency on Vanessa's side during the separation. Vanessa had never forgiven him for winning that custody arrangement. And in the 3 years I had known her, I had slowly come to understand that some significant portion of her ongoing resentment toward Eric had, over time, quietly redirected itself toward me. She was never outright hostile in front of Eric. She was careful, strategic, the kind of person who understood exactly how to construct a sentence that sounded reasonable to anyone listening from outside the relationship, while landing as a precise, deliberate cut to whoever it was actually aimed at. I just think it's important Lily knows who her real family is, she'd say smiling at a school pickup, loud enough for other parents to hear. Some people get confused about that. Eric confronted her about comments like that more than once. Vanessa always denied any intent, framed herself as simply protective of her daughter's understanding of family, and the conversation always ended in the same exhausting stalemate. I learned, eventually, to absorb most of it quietly. For Lily's sake, more than my own. 3 months ago, Lily's kindergarten teacher, a calm, observant woman named Mrs. Patterson, began noticing a pattern that had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with the custody agreement itself. The agreement, finalized through family court, was specific. Vanessa had Lily every other weekend, with no overnight stays involving any romantic partner who hadn't been formally introduced through the court-approved process. A clause Eric's lawyer had insisted on, given Vanessa's history, and one Vanessa had reluctantly agreed to rather than fight in front of a judge. Mrs. Patterson began noticing over several weeks that Lily would arrive on Mondays after Vanessa's weekends, mentioning, in the offhand, unfiltered way young children mention things. A man named Uncle Dave, who had apparently been at Vanessa's apartment a lot, including, on at least 2 occasions, Lily described sleeping over. Mrs. Patterson, to her enormous credit, didn't gossip about it or jump to conclusions. She simply began, quietly, keeping a dated log of exactly what Lily said, in Lily's own words, the way she'd been trained to document anything that might eventually matter for a child's welfare. She had no idea, at the time, how directly relevant that log was about to become. Family Helper Day was an annual kindergarten tradition, a morning where parents and family members were invited into the classroom to share something about their role in a child's life, followed by a small classroom celebration with snacks the families had volunteered to bring. Eric had a site inspection that morning that couldn't be moved. I went in his place, the way I had for most of Lily's school events over the past 3 years, carrying a tray of cupcakes Lily had specifically requested, decorated with the small plastic dinosaurs she'd insisted on the night before. Vanessa, it turned out, had also signed up to attend, something I hadn't known until I walked into the classroom and saw her already seated in one of the small plastic chairs near the reading corner, her blazer immaculate, her smile immediately, deliberately warm in a way that made my stomach tighten before she'd even said a single word. The morning proceeded normally for almost 40 minutes. Parents shared small stories. Lily showed off her paper crown. I helped pass out cupcakes while Mrs. Patterson guided the children through a simple activity about the people who take care of us. And then Vanessa raised her hand, asked Mrs. Patterson if she could share something with the class, and stood up. I just want to say something quickly. Vanessa said, smiling warmly at the children sitting cross-legged on the carpet. Her voice pitched in that particular performative tone adults sometimes use specifically because they know other adults are listening. Family is so important, isn't it? And I think it's nice for kids to really understand who their real family is. She glanced toward me, briefly, just long enough to make sure I understood the comment was deliberately aimed before continuing. Lily's real family is me, and her daddy, and her grandparents. Vanessa continued, still smiling at the children. Sometimes grown-ups bring other people around. Girlfriends, people they're dating. But that's different from real family. It's important kids understand that difference. The classroom went quiet in the specific, uncomprehending way young children go quiet when an adult says something that doesn't match the simple, generous version of the world they're used to operating in. Lily, sitting cross-legged in her paper crown, a half-eaten dinosaur cupcake in her small hands, looked up at her mother, confused, and then turned around slowly to look back at me. I watched her small face try to process what she'd just heard. I watched her glance between Vanessa's confident smile and my own expression, which I was working very hard in that moment to keep calm for her sake, even as something inside my chest had gone completely cold. But Olivia reads me my bedtime stories. Lily said quietly to no one in particular, mostly to herself, and she packs my lunch. And she came to my dance recital. The room stayed silent for one more uncomfortable beat. And then Mrs. Patterson stood up. Mrs. Patterson was not a confrontational woman by nature. In 3 years of school events, I had never once seen her raise her voice or visibly disagree with a parent in front of children. She was, by every account from every other parent I'd ever spoken with, almost universally described as gentle, soft-spoken, conflict-averse. What she did next surprised everyone in that room, including, I think, herself. Vanessa, I am going to gently push back on that, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice calm but unmistakably firm, the kind of firmness that comes from someone who has decided in real time that a child's well-being outweighs whatever social discomfort might follow. Family isn't only about biology. Family is about who shows up consistently for a child. And from everything I've personally observed in this classroom for the past year, Olivia shows up for Lily constantly. Every event, every project, every single time I've reached out about something Lily needed. Vanessa's smile faltered, just slightly, the careful performance cracking for the first time. I think, Mrs. Patterson continued, turning to address the children directly now, her voice softening again. That family means the people who love you and take care of you, even if they're not who you expected family to look like when you were born. Some kids have two moms. Some kids have grandparents raising them. Some kids have a mom and a stepmom, like Lily. All of those are real families. Lily, still holding her half-eaten cupcake, looked back and forth between the two women for a moment, and then, with the simple, devastating clarity that only a 5-year-old can deliver, she said, Olivia's my family too. She's just a different kind. Several other parents in the room, sitting on the small plastic chairs lining the back wall, exchanged quiet, uncomfortable glances.
One mother, I noticed, had quietly started recording on her phone the moment Vanessa stood up, a detail that would matter a great deal later that same week. Vanessa sat back down without finishing whatever else she'd intended to say, her composure visibly rattled, the room's collective discomfort settling over her like something she clearly hadn't anticipated when she'd raised her hand 15 minutes earlier. I didn't say anything to her directly during the rest of the event. I focused on Lily, on the cupcakes, on getting through the remaining 20 minutes without making the situation worse for a classroom full of 5-year-olds who deserve better than watching adults perform conflict in front of them. But when the event ended and parents began filing out, Mrs. Patterson asked, quietly, if I could stay behind for just a moment. She walked me to her desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a manila folder I hadn't known existed until that exact moment. I need to tell you something, she said. And I need you to share this with Eric as soon as possible because I think it's relevant to more than just today. She explained carefully the pattern she'd been documenting for almost 2 months. Lily's offhand comments about Uncle Dave, the specific dates, the specific details Lily had volunteered without prompting. The way Mrs. Patterson had been trained to log exactly this kind of information in case it ever became relevant to a child's welfare. I wasn't going to say anything unless it became necessary, she said. But after what happened in there today, the way Vanessa spoke to Lily in front of the whole class about who counts as family, I think it's worth Eric and his attorney knowing the full picture. Eric called the custody mediator the following morning, and within a week, his attorney had filed a formal request for review based on the documented custody violations. Specifically, the unsupervised overnight presence of an unapproved partner during Vanessa's custodial time, a direct breach of the court ordered agreement. Mrs. Patterson agreed, somewhat reluctantly but firmly, to provide a written statement summarizing her documented observations, explaining that her primary concern, throughout, had simply been Lily's stability and well being. Not taking sides in an adult conflict she hadn't sought out. The other parent who had recorded the classroom moment. A woman named Karen, whose own daughter sat beside Lily on the carpet that day, voluntarily provided that footage as well once she learned, through the school's parent group chat, what was unfolding. The video clearly showed Vanessa's comments to the class, word for word, along with Mrs. Patterson's response and Lily's quiet, devastating line about Olivia being her family too. The footage wasn't admissible as direct evidence in the custody violation itself, but it became, according to Eric's attorney, powerfully relevant context, demonstrating, in Vanessa's own words and on her own initiative, a pattern of actively working to undermine Lily's relationship with a stable, present adult in her life, which the court considered directly alongside the documented custody breach. The hearing took place 2 months later. Vanessa's attorney argued predictably that the Uncle Dave comments were simply a child's imprecise language, that nothing inappropriate had actually occurred, and that the classroom incident was an unrelated personal matter that shouldn't influence custody decisions. The judge, a measured, unhurried woman who had clearly reviewed every document in the file with genuine care, disagreed on both counts. She noted, specifically, that Mrs. Patterson's documentation was detailed, dated, and entirely consistent with professional standards for a mandated reporter genuinely concerned about a child's stability. Not, as Vanessa's attorney had suggested, exaggerated or politically motivated. She noted that the custody agreement's language regarding unapproved overnight partners was explicit and had been violated on at least 4 separate documented occasions. And regarding the classroom incident, the judge said something I have thought about often in the months since. I don't typically weigh in on how parents speak to children about complicated family situations, she said, because reasonable people can disagree about how to navigate that conversation. But there is a meaningful difference between explaining a complicated family structure to a child and deliberately using a classroom full of 5-year-olds as an audience to humiliate another adult in front of your own daughter. The fact that a kindergarten teacher felt compelled to correct a parent in real time, in front of an entire class, tells me everything I need to know about whose comfort was actually being prioritized in that moment. Vanessa's unsupervised weekends were suspended pending a formal reassessment. Her visitation was restructured to include supervised exchanges for a minimum of 6 months, with the possibility of gradual restoration contingent on demonstrated compliance with the original custody terms. Lily is 6 now. She still calls me Olivia. Not mom, never mom. And I've never once wanted that to change because I think there's something quietly beautiful about a child having exactly the right word for exactly the right relationship without anyone forcing a label that doesn't fit. But she also, these days, introduces me to her friends at school pickup with a small, confident clarity that still catches in my throat every time I hear it. This is Olivia, she told a new classmate just last week, completely unprompted. She's my other family, the kind you get to choose. Vanessa and I have not spoken since the hearing. Eric tells me she's been, by every account, more consistent with the restructured visitation schedule. Whether out of genuine reflection or simple legal necessity, neither of us is entirely sure, and at this point, neither of us is particularly invested in finding out which. I think often about that classroom, about the specific, quiet bravery of a kindergarten teacher who had absolutely no professional obligation to publicly correct a parent, and who chose to do it anyway, because she had apparently decided, somewhere in her own private calculus, that a 5-year-old's understanding of who loves her mattered more than the social discomfort of contradicting an adult in front of a room full of witnesses. I think about Lily's small, devastating sentence. Olivia's my family too. She's just a different kind. And how a 5-year-old somehow understood more clearly than the adult who tried to humiliate me exactly what family actually means. She didn't need a courtroom to figure that out. She just needed someone to ask her the question honestly and the room to actually let her answer it. Do you think the judge's ruling on the custody change was fair or too harsh based on the classroom incident alone? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story moved you, subscribe to the Family Ledger for a brand new story every day.